Welcome to the latest edition of Until Saturday live reaction show. I'm Ari Wasserman, joined by my boss, colleague, mentor, Stewart Mandel. We are here in Las Vegas, live from the Pac-12 Championship game, the last Pac-12 Championship game there's ever going to be. Washington, a 10-point underdog, beat Oregon 34-31. It's going to be a crazy weekend of football games. There's going to be a lot of college football playoff discourse, Stu. But this one was cut and dry. Undefeated Washington will now advance to the college football playoff as the Pac-12 champion in the last season of the conference. What was your, takeaway from this game? And, what was it like, as a person who's covered this conference very closely to watch the last one of these?
Yeah, it's still surreal that it was the last one. It's hard to process, but if it is the last one, and it is, they couldn't have gone out on a higher note. I've sat through many very dreary Pac-12 championship games, especially when I was back at Levi's, when there were no playoff stakes, or a team went into it with play and then they got, Utah one year had a chance to go playoff and got destroyed. And this was a massive showdown. Winner goes to the playoff, and it delivered. I was at the first Oregon-Washington game in Seattle, 36-33, and it was amazing how similar this one played out. I don't think Bo Nix played as well as he did in the first game, obviously, but Michael Penix, who hadn't been quite himself, it seemed like recently. It felt like he was back and clicking, at least at the beginning and then the end. He had a rough kind of middle stretch of the game with that interception, but he got them out to that big lead. Then Oregon comes roaring back, and then obviously those 2 touchdown drives to take command of the game again. Just, kudos to Washington going 13-0. Nobody's done that in the Pac-12, so it's extremely impressive.
Yeah, the thing that I love about this team, well, we were down on the field. It was a very long celebration down there. They were down there for about an hour, and I've been to a lot of these games where there's confetti and, hugging and stuff. There was a lot of hugging. There was a lot of confetti, and there was a lot of basking in the moment. But the thing that has stood out to me, Stu, about this team more than anything is, that they really took to heart that they were 10-point underdogs. And if you go back and look at the way that this team has won games the last 3 times they were out on the field, they faced critical 3rd or 4th down moments in those games in which they could have played conservatively, punted, run clock or whatever. And Kaylen DeBoer, Washington's second-year head coach, continually puts the ball in Michael Penix Jr.'s hands, Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan and the players that they have. And, the 19-yard rope that he had against Oregon State on the road to ice that game out, the 4th and 1 from their own 29 last week. And then here they were facing a 3rd and 4 where they would have punted the ball back to Oregon had they not gotten it, and they put it in the air, and it was a 6-yard completion. So I wanted to talk to you about the doubting thing. Do you think that this team can win a playoff game? And do you think that they could win beyond that? Or is it just a fun end to the Pac-12 story to you?
No, I thought whoever won this game had a chance to win games in the playoff. And I felt that way since that October 14th game. Washington in particular, though, they just play with swagger. It reminds me of great teams of the past. Penix is kind of a natural leader. And I just think anytime you have, and I would use, that Ohio State team last year and CJ Stroud, nobody thought they were going to hang with Georgia. And they came within a 50-yard field goal of possibly beating them. That's what happens when you have an elite quarterback like that. And, I don't know what Penix's draft stock is. I don't see him mentioned just going, high in the first round, but you watch him throw, and it's sometimes it's just a thing of beauty. Incredible. And he has such a great connection with his receivers. And then you called it, like, Dan Lanning likes to go for it on 4th down too. Dan Lanning likes to play aggressive.
Both of these coaches.
But you got to have the right play call. And it just seems like Kaylen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, his OC, seem to always have the right call for the right moment. And so, yeah, we knew they were going to pass on 3rd and 4. They weren't going to play conservative. They were just got to have the play that gets you the yards, and they did. And that seems like that's been the theme in all of their close wins.
Anybody who listens to this show, and you're very aware, knows that, I'm a Group A and Group B kind of guy. And if you're not aware of that, Group A are the teams that recruit at a level that is unprecedented, before the last 5-7 years. And you have other teams that are very good, but don't have the talent top to bottom. But the one thing that you just mentioned that I think is undoubtedly true is that if you are a team that's going to hang in a playoff game, if you're a team that is going to go toe to toe with a Georgia or Alabama or a team that is built that way, you have to be able to score points. And this team, between Dylan Johnson, the running back, Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback, and Rome Odunze, who we were having a discussion about whether or not he was the best receiver in college football this year, or certainly, goes toe to toe with Marvin Harrison from Ohio State. Jalen Polk. There's a lot of guys on this team, and they can score.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me excited about watching them. It's like there have been Pac-12 teams that score a ton of points in the past, but, they find a way to win, and their offense is always on the field when they win. And that, to me, makes an exciting matchup. And if they play a team like Michigan or Florida State in the first round, like this could be a team that's on the field in Houston on January 8th.
It feels a lot different than in 2016. That Washington team that made the playoff and played Alabama, it was kind of like, good job, guys. Good job getting to the playoff. You knew they weren't going to beat Alabama, and they didn't. They lost 24-7. They didn't have the firepower that this Washington team does. And, I think of the so there have only been 2 Pac-12 teams to make the playoff. It was that one. The first one was Marcus Mariota's Oregon team.
Yep.
If we were to go look that up, I'm guessing that obviously he was a high pick, but that team didn't produce necessarily a lot of high-round draft picks, but they had him, and he was, a record-setting college quarterback. And they went and played that Florida State team, that Jameis Winston Florida State team. Mm-hmm. I think Jalen Ramsey was on that team, like a bunch of dudes on that team,
right,
and destroyed them. And it was a case of Oregon had it clicking, and Florida State kind of pussed around that whole year. So, when I look at the field, and obviously this will be outdated here very soon, we'll see who wins these games on Saturday, but I don't see anybody that's like, 2018 Clemson or 2020 Alabama that like is just going to
even the big
wipe
dogs
these
of the
guys
sport
off.
kind of have a question marks about that. Like we're sitting here in the press box, past midnight, and I don't know who's going to win the Alabama-Georgia game tomorrow.
No, I mean, Georgia's still very good. They've won 29 games in a row. I'm not going to, but I do think they're maybe a little more vulnerable than they were the last couple of years. And they certainly haven't been playing Michael Penix and some of these receivers Washington has every week in the SEC.
I think I just need to give Washington an apology, because I've been saying on this podcast for the past 6 weeks that they're going to lose. They're not good enough. Their defense stinks, and that ever since that USC game when it was whoever had the ball last was going to win. And I was wrong. I'm very impressed with this team, and I'm very impressed with Kaylen DeBoer. And, it's so funny. You and Bruce Feldman do these rankings every year in the offseason of ranking the top 20 coaches in college football. And, I know there's always some debate about, where coaches started, whether they built programs, what they've won, and all this stuff. And I'm looking back at this Washington program, and I'm thinking 2 years ago, I was scoffing at Jimmy Lake's inability to recruit talent, missing out on 5-star prospects from the Seattle area, or at least in the state of Washington. And then he goes and gets Michael Penix and uses a previous relationship to, bring a quarterback in here that plays the way that he does. And they have these receivers that are really, really good, and he creates a functional defense. And it's when you start looking at program building and, where things are, it's this is how quickly a coach can go from hire that kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit to making that list.
And he wasn't really a big name by any means,
right?
Football people knew him as he was a great NAIA coach many years ago, but he'd only been the coach at Fresno State for 2 years, and turned out to just be an exceptional hire. He's won 20 games in a row at this point, 9-0 against top 25 teams at Washington. Just a great coach. I think, this is skipping ahead, but it's going to be really fascinating to see how he fits into the Big Ten next year. But in terms of this year, I don't know if there's another team where you can just pinpoint specific games and say, that was coaching. I mean, the game against Washington State last week, it was insane. They went for it on 4th down. Their own 29?
Yeah.
Tie game, late in the game. If you don't get it, you just lost. You've handed Washington State the game-winning field goal, ruined your undefeated season, and they had the perfect play call for it.
I tweeted this during the game, and I don't know if I'm a psychopath, but I called them the Mozart of play design. It's just not just the right call, but they're beautiful. Yeah. Even when they run trick plays, like that one play, I think it was in the second quarter down there where they ran the reverse throwback pass. Three yeah, when other teams run plays like that, it just is the epitome of what coined the term grab pass. And when they run it, it's just everybody's in the right place. Everybody's running it perfectly, and it looks intentional. And there was one broken tackle away from going from a 9-yard gain to a touchdown. So
there's a reason they're paying Ryan Grubb $2 million a year.
Yeah. Well, the $2 million cornerback. Yeah. I mean, that's the $2 million coordinator actually coming out there and doing it. But the thing that I love the most, and I've written columns in the past about Dan Lanning going forward and the way that he went forward on 4th and 5 on the on his own side of the field in the beginning of the second half and got it. Like, I am just at the point right now where you have to have a coach that believes in your team, in his own team, in his players. And when you have guys like Penix and Odunze, knowing that not only you can trust them in those moments to execute, but also the second part of that is the design piece, having the perfect call at the perfect time that makes those high leverage moments seem less big because you're going to execute a play the other team doesn't have coming. It's different than going for it on 4th and 1 in a high crucial moment and just running a dive and getting stuffed. When he makes these calls, you have this feeling that it's going to work because he has something in his bag that the other coach isn't ready for. And it happens time and time again. And given a month to prepare, like, I even made the mistake earlier today thinking to myself, man, if I could like match up Kaylen DeBoer's ability to do this with a Group A roster, what that would look like. And then I caught myself and thought, that's disrespectful. Like, these guys are every bit as good as those teams that they're going to be playing. And like, they made a believer out of me. I was like,
that's how I felt coming off. So that's how I felt coming off the first one, covering that Washington-Oregon game in Seattle. I was sold. I even wrote a column saying I think they could win the national championship. And then they immediately went into a tailspin. They had that weird 15-7 game against Arizona State.
Yeah.
They gave up a ton of yards to Stanford. They USC kind of had to outscore them, basically. Like, they just hadn't yet played at the level they did that game until tonight. And I don't think it's a coincidence that other than Odunze, their other receivers have all been injured at some point, and they're all finally healthy again in time for this game. And it just seemed like their offense clicked. And then the other big thing is Dylan Johnson. This might have been his best game of the season. He ran for a lot of yards on USC, but everybody runs for a lot of yards on USC.
These were like tough, big yards. Yeah.
Yeah. He had a good game in the first Oregon game, but not like tonight. And so if you get the run game going with him, then that's a pretty tough offense to stop.
Yeah. And it's like, your house, our house, neutral field, getting it done. So I'm very excited to watch this team play. And certainly speaking, as we go into the Saturday and Sunday and we try to figure out who's going to make the playoff, it's going to be an interesting dynamic just knowing that they're there. Now, I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the playoff, but first, is there anything from the Oregon side of things that we can learn, about Dan Lanning and his team? It's like, when you think about the way we're talking and glowing about Washington, they've earned that. They deserve that.
Yeah.
But like, you think about Oregon and being 1 or 2 plays away from being in the same position, it kind of, reminds you about how thin the margins are in the sport sometimes too.
I mean, they played 2 games against each other, and each one was by 3 points. So, and one was in Seattle and one was on a neutral field. So they're like, this is not how it works. But if Washington is the number 3 seed in the playoff, you could say, well, then maybe Oregon should be number 4. It's not going to work that way because they have 2 losses. But these 2 teams are separated by this much, and sometimes it comes down to, they missed a field goal at the end of the game in Seattle. I thought this game turned when Penix threw that interception.
Yeah.
And you thought, the wheels are coming off.
Yeah.
And then Bo Nix turns around and throws an interception, which he almost never does. So, if he doesn't, the game might play out differently. They're a really good team. I think both of these teams showed they're top 5 teams. Oregon's not going to make the playoff. Somebody, fill this thing out. But they got nothing to be ashamed of. And they'll go play probably in the Fiesta Bowl. I doubt we'll see Bo Nix in that game, though he kind of stiff-armed that question afterward.
Yeah.
But
a very funny answer.
It was a very funny answer, but then later, I don't know if it's the same question or another one. He kept talking in the past tense about being a college football player. So
yes, yeah.
Kind of told me we won't be seeing him in the bowl game.
Yeah. So now I'm like thinking and I don't know if I'm just like sick, but I've been thinking for a while now about all these crazy playoff scenarios. So we have no debate because like my number one nightmare was if Oregon wins this game and Texas wins their game, that we'd be having a discussion about which one-loss team should be left out. So that's one more spot that's taken by a team that's not part of the debate. So now you're going to have 2. Can we assume that Michigan's probably going to beat Iowa? So those 2 teams will probably be in there. Florida State has a big game, but it looks like we're getting closer to the cleanest possible scenario, which is 4 unbeaten Power 5 teams.
Which has never happened. So It would be historic. But again, like, even when these guys are 10-point or 9.5-point underdogs, they still stayed undefeated. So that has been the theme. So should we be surprised Saturday if all the undefeated teams win again? Probably not. But yeah, this helped make it cleaner. If Florida State loses, then I think it becomes very clean. But of course, Alabama would cover. I think if Alabama wins, it kind of mucks the whole thing up because there'll be arguments that Georgia should stay in the top 4, right? There'll be arguments that Texas should be in over, like that. Just Alabama beating Georgia creates a lot of weird scenarios.
Yeah, when you think about 2-1 loss teams, or 3-1 loss teams being compared to one another on Sunday, and then one chosen, and no matter who you pick, the other team got screwed. It's just like it's kind of a bad taste in your mouth if you're a 4-team playoff person. I've been a 4-team playoff person. Watching this game here this evening was a playoff game, and it felt great. And for people who wanted the 12-team playoff, like we actually kind of have it now, if it all works out in the way that it's supposed to. But if it doesn't work out in the way that it's supposed to, then you have chaos and teams being left out when they shouldn't be. That creates angst as we go into the offseason into next year, and maybe rightfully so.
Well, I think the committee's actually gotten very lucky over the years. They haven't had – the first year was messy. The year where Penn State had 2 losses but had beaten Ohio State, who had 1 loss, was messy. But usually it just seems to work out where there's a clear-cut 4, and it could happen again here. I'll tell you what hasn't happened. Like if Texas wins, I do have sympathy for it. If Texas wins and doesn't make the playoff, in any other year, that team makes the playoff. A 12-1 team, their only loss was to a 10-win team. Like, it's not even a thought.
And they've got the golden ticket to the Willy Wonka factory, which is a 10-point win on the road at Alabama. Like, it's not even a debate.
Hard to fathom that team wouldn't make it, but they might not this year just because it's such a crowded field. But there hasn't been a team like that. Like, Ohio State got left out in 2018. They were 12-1 Big Ten champ, but they had that terrible loss to Purdue. So I don't think there are a lot of people like, what an injustice that Ohio State didn't make the playoff.
Right.
But I think Texas would have a reason to feel like, yeah, we got jobs.
And like the thing is that like if Alabama ends up winning, people will be like, the last 2 teams in, one beat the other on the road by double digits. What are we talking about? And I think it's important to remind people that's not how the committee works. They're not just going to compare Alabama and Texas. They're going to view their entire bodies of work. And then Alabama will, of course, have a win over Georgia, which would be the best win in the country. Right. And that could vault them up to number 2, thus leaving the number 4 debate between Texas and somebody else.
Unfortunately, doesn't get a chance to have a great final statement, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that Oklahoma State team's very good. I know they're ranked in the top 20, but they lost 45-3 to UCF not that long ago. So it's not gonna wow people. It's really all they can do tomorrow is like get that stamp on the resume that says conference champion,
undefeated or 1-loss conference champion.
Yeah. We're told conference championships matter. So if, for instance, Alabama beats Georgia, Florida State cuts out of the picture, and the 4th spot is between 12-1 Georgia and 12-1 Texas. In theory, the conference champion should prevail, but we don't. They can do whatever they want.
Catherine is in the chat saying that she doesn't understand how you do not directly compare a team that beat another team. And you've done the mock playoff committee, right? Where you go in there and pretend like you're on it. You vote in pools, okay? So you don't just sit there and look at one team versus another. You rank, I believe, your top 3, and then that formulates a top 3. Then you rank your 4 through 6. Yeah. So there's never a discussion of head-to-head who won the game. It's not like as simple and cut and dry as that. So if Alabama beats Georgia, funny enough, they will have the best win in the country and probably vault up to number 2 potentially, or number 3. And then the 4th spot won't be between Texas and Alabama, even though Texas beat them. It's a very complicated system. It's not
like if it were to come down to the final rankings came out and it was like Alabama 4, Texas 5, people should rightfully lose their minds. Like, how can you do that?
But right? Alabama would certainly be 3 if they won that game.
Absolutely.
And then whoever is 4, then you have a discussion about that. Now, one thing,
they could move up to 2. Like, they would have 4 top 25 wins, and they would have beaten number 1 Georgia in their last game.
Yeah.
And so I think But
the irony here, though, Stu, is that if that happens, then Texas's win over Alabama becomes a shining badge of honor that is dismissed.
I don't know about dismissed, but
if they're left out,
not enough. What they would tell you is it was a great win, but we can't judge the teams off one game. We have to judge them off 13, and Alabama's 13 would have been better than Texas's 13. I hope it doesn't come down to that. And of course, the easiest way would be Georgia. If Georgia wins and Florida State loses, and Texas takes care of business against Oklahoma State, Texas is in.
Then Texas is in, and then it's a very clean.
Yeah.
So let me just do one thing before we get out of here, because we're 20 minutes in, and this is going to be a brief show. But the one thing that I was pondering today, as I was taking a shower before this game, got a lot of deep thoughts in the shower. The warm water trickling down. It's been a long day, guys. Is this the committee, as you noted, hasn't been put in a scenario. They've been very lucky. They haven't been put in a scenario where they have to make a tough decision that there is a clear and identifiable loser that should not have been left out, but there's no spots. Now, I'm not going to have a tinfoil hat on here, but if the committee is put into a position that it's never been put in before, coming off what Bill Hancock said very clearly to Heather Dinich earlier this week about we're not trying to put in the 4 most deserving, we're trying to put in the 4 best. Is it possible that if no matter what way you do this, one team is absolutely going to be screwed, for lack of a better word? Is it possible, and Lord forgive me, that they might screw Florida State?
It's possible.
As an undefeated team if they end up winning.
It's possible. Today when we saw the reports that Tate Rodemaker might be out too, I thought to myself, I guess it's just not meant to be their year. And then I thought, if they win, if they beat, because they're not playing, a 8-4 team.
They're most certainly
playing
able to win the game.
10-2 Louisville, right? And if they can win that game with a third-string quarterback who hasn't played all year, you shouldn't dock them. You should make them the number 1 seed. They must be really good that they're still able to win despite that.
Yeah, I keep thinking to myself that if there is an injustice where Texas is the odd man out at 5, what draws the line or the distinction between screwing one team or the other? You're going to mess it up somehow because you have no choice. I don't know. I've always been your undefeated Power 5 champ. You're automatically in. But if they are a top 15 team and not a top 4 team in gambling power ratings, and everybody knows with their eyes that it's not a team that is probably equipped to play on that stage, do you reward a team like Texas who beat Alabama on the road in this scenario where Alabama is the SEC champion? You got to remember that your brain rewires a little bit with that Alabama win. Would you feel more? Let me ask you, Stu, if you were on the committee, would you be more comfortable leaving Texas out in this scenario, or Alabama or Florida State unbeaten in this scenario?
I would keep Florida State. And here's the thing, that thing, Bill Hancock, I love Bill, but the thing about them, we don't do most deserving, we do best, is not accurate. I mean, they may think they do that, but no, they do most deserving. And here's a great example of that. Iowa, you mentioned power ratings. Iowa is ranked 38th in one of the S&P, Sagarin, all those. They're 31st, 33rd, 38th. They're 15th in the committee rankings. Why are they 15th? Because they're 10-2. It has nothing to do with the actual performance of how good the team is. Well, they've won 10 and they've lost 2, and we think they're, they should be slotted here. That's what they do. They slot teams based on who deserves to be where. And so if Florida State gets to 13-0, despite the adversity, which I'm sure they'll use that phrase, no, I don't think you can leave them out.
Well, I think that this is one way to close this out here. Aaron Pennington, one of our most loyal listeners. We appreciate you, Aaron, and Catherine, and all you guys, Matthew, who are in here. We can sit here and say, well, we know Florida State isn't going to win. But that's exactly what we were saying about Washington today. Yeah, you can't play. I picked Oregon.
I saw somebody in one of the comments of one of my stories say, you can't put Florida State in because they're just going to get killed in the playoff game. And it's look at the list of playoff games over the years and all the teams that have been killed in a play. Yeah. If that's your bar, we can't let anybody in that might get crushed. You should just maybe stop holding the thing. Yeah. There's no legislating out. I mean, 10 out of 10 people would have had TCU in the playoff last year. It's easy to go back now and say they just weren't as good as those other teams, et cetera. First of all, they beat Michigan in the semifinal. They were 13-1 at that point. They lost 65-7. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have been in there. So I'm with Aaron. You can't go by I'm picking Florida State. If Florida State plays Georgia, they're going to lose by 17 points. I don't know what's going to happen if Florida State plays Georgia.
The games have to matter, and if I'm going to sit here as an arrogant 4-team playoff person, propping up the regular season as this holy thing that we can't disrupt, then we have to make those games matter.
You can't go 13-0 in the regular season power conference, having beaten LSU, who may have the Heisman winner. Like I said, they're going to end with a 10-win team here, and be like, well, that was nice, guys, but we just have a hunch.
We have a hunch.
We're 13 people in a room, and we have a hunch that you're not actually one of the 4 best teams anymore. So we're going to leave you out, and we're going to bring in this team that did lose a game.
I think it's an interesting thing to think about, though, because, Stu, as funny as it is, if Alabama were to win, and I know people are like, why are all these journalists saying Alabama? Nobody said they were going to win. If they win, they are going to be making a subjective decision one way or the other. They're going to have to pick between Alabama or Texas or Florida State. All these teams are going to – one team is going – there's
a scenario where Alabama and Texas both get in. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. I don't – what's that path?
Get Florida State out of there. So it's Michigan, Washington,
Alabama and Texas.
I actually think the decision they would have to make is Georgia versus Texas.
Yeah, that to me is cut and dry.
It might be cut and dry to you, but you're talking about one team they currently have ranked number 1. The other they currently have ranked number 7. And so
to me, it's like if Georgia were to lose and get in, like what's the distinction between Ohio State and Georgia at that point? They both lost to the one team in the conference that rivals them, and they don't have a lot of,
the distinction would be that they've won 29 games in a row.
Well, last year doesn't matter, I thought.
It doesn't, but they're human beings in that room.
Well, as you can see, this is going to be a crazy discussion as we continue on into Saturday. Thank you guys so much for staying up late for us. Stewart's been talking about playing craps with me all night. This is a guy who's ready to gamble. It's going to be late, but we're going to be around all day on Saturday. I don't know if we're going to go live or not, but we will have our usual Saturday night reaction show after all the games come to a close with me and David Ubben. And I'll be around all day Saturday. Enjoy that game. Thank you so much again for participating in the online live reaction shows. This will be in the podcast feed as well. If you're a YouTube only watcher right now and you want to get the podcast, find Until Saturday wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're listening to this on Saturday night or Sunday morning and you want to watch YouTube when we go live on Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, all the links will be found in the show's description. For Stewart Mandel, I'm Ari Wasserman. Why don't we go play some blackjack?
Let's go to sleep.